Hi friends. Something has been following you without a name. A shadow at the edge of sleep. A shape you recognize but cannot hold. What science calls fear is not a flaw in your wiring. It is a precision system, calibrated over millions of years, that activates not only in the presence of real danger, but in the presence of anything that once felt dangerous, including the things that live only in memory and imagination. That system runs deeper than thought. It writes itself into the body before the mind can translate it. And here is what changes everything. The same brain that builds the fear also builds the dream. The same architecture that learned the threat can be guided, deliberately, gently, to unlearn it. Welcome to Sleepy Science. Tonight begins inside the dream, where the fear has nowhere to hide. Close your eyes. Let your breath slow. The place where fear has always worked is also where it can, at last, begin to rest. And now we begin. The human brain processes fear through a structure called the amygdala, a small, almond-shaped region deep in the temporal lobe that activates before conscious thought has time to form. When something triggers fear, the amygdala fires within milliseconds, sending signals through the body that raise heart rate, sharpen attention, and prepare muscles for action. This response is ancient, conserved across hundreds of millions of years of evolution. But the amygdala does not distinguish between a tiger in front of you and a memory of a tiger. Both produce the same cascade. The fear is real, even when the danger is not. Tonight, we begin here, at the root of the system. Because to understand how lucid dreaming reaches fear, you first need to understand what fear actually is inside the brain. Fear memory is stored differently from ordinary memory. While everyday facts and episodes are processed through the hippocampus and gradually transferred to the cortex, fear memories develop an additional pathway, consolidated within the amygdala itself, reinforced by stress hormones like cortisol and norepinephrine released at the moment of the fearful experience. This double encoding is adaptive. Remembering what hurt you once is useful for survival. But it also means fear memories are more emotionally durable, more resistant to fading, and more likely to be reactivated by partial cues. A smell, a sound, a particular quality of light that shares something with the original threat. The brain does not simply remember fear. It reconstructs it, vividly, from fragments. That reconstruction is what lucid dreaming will eventually learn to interrupt. The prefrontal cortex, the large region directly behind your forehead, serves as the brain's regulator of fear. When functioning well, it sends inhibitory signals to the amygdala, effectively saying, "The threat has passed. You are safe. You may lower the alarm." This is the mechanism behind most modern fear reduction therapies. Exposure therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing all work, in part, by strengthening the prefrontal cortex's influence over amygdala activity. During waking life, this regulation requires effort, repetition, and context. During lucid dreaming, the same prefrontal activity appears, but within a state where the fear cannot cause physical harm, and the brain is already generating its own imagery. That combination turns out to be medically meaningful. Lucid dreaming is defined as becoming aware that you are dreaming while the dream continues. The dreamer remains inside the dream. Imagery, characters, and narrative all persist, but a portion of consciousness has awakened, allowing recognition of the experience as a dream in real time. The first scientific confirmation came in 1975, when psychologist Keith Hearn observed prearranged eye movement signals from a sleeping subject, proving that a dreamer could exert deliberate, voluntary control while in REM, sleep. Since then, lucid dreaming has been studied across dozens of sleep laboratories worldwide. It is not a metaphysical concept or a spiritual practice, though many traditions have incorporated it as one. It is a documented, repeatable, measurable state of consciousness that leaves distinct signatures in brain activity. The brain during lucid dreaming is not simply a dreaming brain. EEG recordings show elevated activity in the gamma frequency band, particularly in the frontal regions, compared to ordinary REM sleep. Gamma waves are associated with high-level cognition, self-reflection, and the binding of information across brain regions. Their increase during lucid dreaming suggests the self-monitoring capacity of the prefrontal cortex has been partially restored while the REM state is maintained. This is neurologically unusual. During standard REM sleep, the prefrontal cortex is largely suppressed. One reason ordinary dreams feel so uncritically real. In lucid dreaming, something opens. The regulator reactivates. The dreamer can observe what is happening inside their own sleeping mind, and that observation itself becomes a form of agency. Exposure therapy is currently the gold standard treatment for phobias and post-traumatic stress disorder. The principle is straightforward. Gradual, repeated contact with the feared stimulus, under safe, controlled conditions, allows the fear association to weaken over time through a process called extinction learning. The amygdala learns, through accumulated experience, that the trigger no longer predicts harm. The prefrontal cortex's inhibitory signals grow stronger. The emotional response diminishes, and the person gains the capacity to function near what once overwhelmed them. This process requires safety. The person must face the fear without being overwhelmed by it. Tolerate enough discomfort for learning to occur, but not so much that the experience reinforces the original trauma. Finding that window has always been the clinical challenge. Researchers studying the overlap between lucid dreaming and exposure therapy have proposed that the dream environment offers something the waking world cannot always provide: a genuinely safe container for feared stimuli. In a dream, a feared object cannot cause physical harm. Heights cannot break bones. Threatening figures cannot make actual contact. The emotional response may feel entirely real. The amygdala activates in REM sleep, as it does in waking fear responses. But the physical consequences are absent. If a dreamer can become aware that they are dreaming in the presence of a feared stimulus, the brain may be able to process the fear response without reinforcement, gradually weakening the association. The dream, in this model, becomes a built-in exposure chamber. The emotional intensity of dreams is not incidental. During REM sleep, the brain is highly emotionally active. The amygdala shows increased activity compared to slow-wave sleep. The anterior cingulate cortex, which monitors emotional conflicts, is also engaged. Norepinephrine, the neurotransmitter most associated with the stress response, is at its lowest level of the day during REM sleep. This creates a paradoxical environment. High emotional processing, low stress arousal. Emotions are being activated and worked with, but the hormonal fuel for alarm has been reduced. Some researchers describe this as the brain's built-in emotional regulation window, a state specifically calibrated to process affective content without full physiological escalation. This is one reason REM sleep disruption is so consistently linked to worsening anxiety. Nightmares are themselves a form of failed emotional processing during sleep. Approximately half of adults report having nightmares occasionally, and between 4 and 8% of the general population experience clinically significant nightmare disorder. Recurrent, distressing nightmares that cause sleep disruption and daytime impairment. For people with post-traumatic stress disorder, the figure is far higher, with some studies reporting nightmare frequency in over 70% of PTSD cases. In nightmare disorder, the fear response during REM sleep appears to escalate rather than diminish. The dream intensifies. The amygdala fires more strongly, and the sleeper wakes before emotional content can be processed. The night that should have brought regulation brings more fear instead. This pattern is the context in which lucid dreaming holds genuine clinical interest. Imagery. Rehearsal therapy is a validated treatment for nightmare disorder developed by psychologist Barry Krakow in the 1990s. The patient writes down a recurrent nightmare, then consciously rewrites the ending during waking hours, altering the narrative so that it resolves differently, often without the threatening element or with a more empowering conclusion. The patient rehearses the new dream narrative mentally every day. Clinical trials have consistently shown this technique reduces nightmare frequency and severity. The mechanism appears to involve the brain's capacity for memory reconsolidation. When a fear memory is retrieved and reactivated, it briefly becomes malleable. And if something new is introduced during that window, the memory can be updated. Lucid dreaming offers a more direct version of the same process, altering the dream while it is still happening. The first recorded protocol for using lucid dreaming in nightmare treatment was developed by German psychologist Paul Tholey in the 1980s. Tholey had studied lucid dreaming for years as a psychological phenomenon, but his clinical applications emerged from working with patients distressed by recurring nightmares, particularly those involving menacing figures. His key insight was that a lucid dreamer, upon becoming aware within a threatening dream, could choose to change their behavior, not to flee, but to approach, speak with, or simply stand their ground in the presence of the threatening figure. This act of deliberate engagement, Tholey argued, represented a kind of real-time exposure, and he reported that patients who achieved it often experienced significant reduction in nightmare recurrence. His work predated the neuroscience that would eventually explain why it worked. The relationship between lucid dreaming and fear involves a physiological challenge. When a dreamer encounters a feared stimulus and begins to recognize they are dreaming, the recognition can itself provoke arousal. The heart rate may increase, brain activity in the frontal regions rises. The risk is that this arousal wakes the dreamer before the therapeutic moment can be completed. This is known in the research literature as the arousal problem. Lucid dreaming is most useful for fear processing, precisely at the moment when it is hardest to maintain. Training the ability to stabilize a lucid dream through techniques such as rubbing the hands together within the dream, spinning the body, or grounding attention on a specific sensory detail, is therefore a prerequisite for using lucid dreaming effectively in fear-related work. There are several validated methods for inducing lucid dreams. Wake back to bed involves setting an alarm 4 to 6 hours after sleep onset, remaining briefly awake, then returning to sleep, placing the dreamer in a long, cognitively active REM period. The mnemonic induction of lucid dreams technique, developed by psychologist Stephen LeBurge, involves repeating an intention before sleep and mentally rehearsing, becoming aware within a recent dream. Reality testing involves periodically asking, during waking hours, whether you are dreaming and examining evidence, training the habit of critical self-reflection that can carry over into sleep. None of these methods succeeds immediately for most people, but each builds the capacity over time. The ability to become lucid is not fixed. It is learned, like any cognitive skill, through structured practice. Fear conditioning and fear extinction are both active processes in the brain. Fear conditioning, the learning that a stimulus predicts harm, is relatively fast, capable of occurring in a single trial under sufficient intensity. Fear extinction, the learning that the stimulus is no longer dangerous, is slower, requiring repeated exposure and absence of harm. Crucially, extinction does not erase the original fear memory. The original association remains encoded in the amygdala. What extinction creates is a new, competing memory that inhibits the original. This is why fear can return, in new contexts, after long gaps, or under stress, even after successful treatment. The fear that was extinguished was never deleted. It was overlaid with something safer. Understanding this matters for understanding what lucid dreaming must achieve. Not erasure, but sustained overlay. Neuroimaging studies of patients who have successfully undergone exposure therapy for phobias show consistent changes in brain activity. Before treatment, a phobia-related image produces strong amygdala activation. After successful treatment, the same image produces reduced amygdala activation and increased activity in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the region most directly linked to extinction memory. The prefrontal cortex has trained itself to respond more strongly to the formerly feared stimulus. The amygdala has not been silenced. It still activates, but the prefrontal regulation now arrives faster and more effectively. Researchers who have studied lucid dreamers processing feared content report a similar pattern. Prefrontal activity rises during the lucid confrontation of feared stimuli, and patients report reduced emotional intensity in the scenario after waking. The neural signature of exposure therapy appears even within the dream. One of the most studied forms of nightmare in clinical populations is the trauma nightmare, a dream that replays elements of a traumatic event, often with high fidelity to the original experience. Trauma nightmares differ from ordinary bad dreams in that they follow the trauma's script rather than generating new narrative content. The brain is not improvising. It is replaying. Researchers believe this reflects a failure in normal memory consolidation. The traumatic memory has not been adequately integrated into the broader autobiographical narrative, and the REM state keeps returning to it, attempting to complete processing that was interrupted. Lucid dreaming interventions for trauma nightmares are more complex than for ordinary phobias, because the feared content is a memory rather than a hypothetical, and must be approached with particular care. Stephen LeBerg, who founded the Lucidity Institute at Stanford University, conducted experiments demonstrating that physiological responses in lucid dreams closely correspond to imagined actions. When lucid dreamers were instructed to clench their fists within the dream while making a prearranged eye movement signal, EMG readings showed measurable muscle activation in the hands. When dreamers held their breath within the dream, respiratory monitoring showed a corresponding pause in breathing. The mind-body correspondence in lucid dreaming is remarkably tight. This has direct implications for fear processing. If the body responds physiologically to dream events, then the emotional activation that occurs when a dreamer confronts a feared stimulus in a lucid dream is genuine activation, not a simulation of fear, but a real fear response occurring in a controlled environment. Published research in peer-reviewed journals, including Frontiers in Psychology and the journal Dreaming, has explored what researchers call lucid dreaming therapy as an adjunct treatment for post-traumatic nightmares. Preliminary protocols typically involve 3 phases: training the patient to achieve lucid dreaming, briefing them on how to modify the dream narrative when lucid, and debriefing them after sessions. Early results have been cautiously promising. Patients trained in lucid dreaming induction who successfully achieved lucidity during nightmares reported reduced nightmare severity and decreased distress compared to waitlist controls. The studies remain small, and methodological challenges persist. Not all patients can achieve reliable lucidity, but the theoretical basis is strong, and the direction of results has been consistent across multiple independent research groups. The experience of fear within a lucid dream is qualitatively different from fear in waking life, and this difference may be therapeutic in itself. When a dreamer becomes aware they are dreaming in the presence of something frightening, they gain an observational distance that ordinary fear does not permit. In waking life, fear narrows attention. The threat becomes everything, filling the perceptual field. In a lucid dream, the dreamer can hold 2 frames simultaneously. The fear is real, and this is a dream. This dual awareness does not eliminate the emotional content. The fear still registers, but it registers alongside the knowledge that no physical harm can occur, that the situation can be altered, that the dreamer has agency. That combination, fear plus agency, is precisely what exposure therapy aims to produce. The sleep stages in which therapeutic dream work is most possible are not uniform across the night. The majority of REM sleep, and particularly the long, complex REM episodes most likely to support narrative dreaming and lucid dreaming, occurs in the second half of the night, with the richest, most vivid REM periods typically in the 90 minutes before natural waking. This has a practical implication for anyone attempting to use lucid dreaming for fear work. The most favorable window is late in the sleep period. early night sleep is weighted towards slow-wave sleep, which is physically restorative, but not rich in the kind of emotionally active dreaming that supports therapeutic intervention. The brain's own schedule points toward morning as the time when fear and dream meet most fully. Phobias affect approximately 12% of adults in the United States at any given point, making them among the most common anxiety disorders. Specific phobias: fears of heights, spiders, enclosed spaces, flying, or medical procedures, are highly responsive to treatment. Exposure therapy produces remission or near remission in 60 to 90% of specific phobia cases. Yet fewer than 1 in 5 people with a specific phobia ever seeks treatment. Barriers include the cost of therapy, availability of trained clinicians, and, for many patients, the dread of the exposure itself. The anticipated discomfort of the treatment is itself a deterrent. If lucid dreaming can be developed into a self-directed exposure tool accessible outside clinical settings, it could reach the large majority of phobia sufferers who never make it to a therapist's office. The phenomenon of dream characters presents a particular dimension of lucid dream therapy. In many recurrent nightmares, the feared element is not a situation but a person, a threatening figure appearing with disturbing consistency. Paul Foley's insight was that these figures, when approached rather than fled, often behave differently than the dreamer expects. A figure that appears menacing at a distance becomes more ordinary upon confrontation. Characters who pursue when the dreamer runs sometimes stop when the dreamer stops. Foley interpreted this through a Gestalt psychology lens. The threatening figure is a projection of the dreamer's own disowned emotional content, and facing it is an act of internal integration. Whether or not the Gestalt interpretation is correct, the behavioral change upon confrontation has been reported consistently across cultures and dreaming traditions. A notable case study in the published literature describes a patient with a recurrent drowning nightmare that had persisted for over a decade following a near-drowning experience. The patient was trained in lucid dreaming induction over 6 weeks, achieving reliable lucidity after approximately 3 weeks of practice. During his first lucid encounter with the drowning scenario, the patient became aware he was dreaming, remained in the scene rather than waking, and altered the narrative. He allowed himself to sink rather than struggle, and discovered that the water became calm and safe. The nightmare did not recur in the months following. While a single case study cannot establish causality, it illustrates the mechanism researchers are trying to understand. Engaging the feared content from within a state of awareness appears to change the fear's hold. The cultural history of intentional dreaming is far older than modern neuroscience. Ancient Greek practice included incubation dreams, deliberately induced dreams sought in temples of Asclepius, where petitioners would sleep on sacred grounds, hoping to receive healing visions. In Tibetan Buddhist practice, the tradition of dream yoga involves cultivating awareness within the dream state as a path toward liberation. Recognizing the dream, as dream is described, as analogous to recognizing ordinary waking experience as constructed rather than solid. Indigenous traditions across North America, South America, Africa, and Australia have incorporated lucid dreaming within broader frameworks of healing and initiation. The specific neurological mechanisms differ from what modern sleep science describes. But the basic observation, that awareness within the dream changes its emotional quality, appears across traditions separated by thousands of years. After 24 facts, a pattern has emerged. The brain's fear system is not a static vault, but a living process. One that can be approached from inside the experience that fear creates. The amygdala that fires during a nightmare is the same amygdala that learns to stand down after enough safe exposure. The prefrontal cortex that regulates fear during waking therapy is the same prefrontal cortex that activates during lucid dreaming, when a sleeper becomes aware and chooses to stay rather than wake. Fear and awareness have always operated in the same space. What science is beginning to document carefully is this: deliberately bringing awareness into the space fear occupies, whether in a therapist's office, a meditation cushion, or the private theater of a dream, follows the same underlying neural logic. That is where the next arc begins. You're still here with us, and that means everything. A gentle subscribe helps another sleepless mind find their way home. Let's take a breath together now, one sleepy soul at a time. Right now, the amygdala that just processed 25 facts about fear is quieter than it was an hour ago. Not because the fear is gone, but because you have been listening to it described, held at a distance, named with precision. The naming changes the chemistry. The amygdala's alarm softens when the prefrontal cortex has language for what it is experiencing. The question that just opened, whether awareness inside the dream can do what awareness in a therapist's office does, is not only a scientific question. You may have already touched it. In a dream you half remember, when something shifted and the fear could not follow you all the way. Notice your breath. Your body is already demonstrating the answer. Now we continue. The two primary neurotransmitter systems involved in fear extinction are gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, and glutamate. GABA is the brain's principal inhibitory neurotransmitter. It reduces neuronal excitability and is the chemical target of benzodiazepine medications used in anxiety treatment. Glutamate is the principal excitatory neurotransmitter and plays a central role in synaptic plasticity, including the formation of new memories. Extinction learning requires both glutamate-driven plasticity to encode the new safety association, and GABA-mediated inhibition to dampen the original fear response. Disruptions to either system through chronic stress, sleep deprivation, or certain medications impair extinction learning and make fear harder to treat. This is one reason sleep quality is not incidental to anxiety treatment. Sleep is when much of the glutamate-driven consolidation of extinction memories occurs. The hippocampus plays a critical contextual role in fear and extinction. Fear memories are not triggered equally in all contexts. A person who developed a phobia of dogs following a bite is more likely to experience fear in situations that share context with the original event. Outdoor settings, the specific breed, the presence of a leash. The hippocampus maintains contextual information about the circumstances of memory encoding. Extinction memories are also context-dependent. Safety, learned in one setting, does not always transfer to another. This is the return of fear problem. A patient who successfully extinguishes a fear in a clinical setting may find it returning in the original context. The dream context may be advantageous here, clearly distinct from waking reality. Dream-based extinction learning may resist context-dependent return. The concept of reconsolidation is central to recent advances in fear treatment. When a memory is retrieved, actively recalled or re-experienced, it briefly enters an unstable state, during which it can be modified before being restored. This reconsolidation window typically lasts 1 to 6 hours after memory retrieval. If new information is introduced during this window, particularly safety information that contradicts the original fear association, the stored memory can be updated. This is the mechanism behind propranolol-assisted trauma therapy, where a beta blocker is given immediately after trauma memory retrieval to prevent the reconsolidation of the memory's emotional charge. Lucid dreaming, in which the dreamer is actively inside the fear memory's reconstruction and can introduce new narrative elements while it is being processed, engages this window naturally and without pharmacological intervention. Research published in the journal Sleep has explored how nightmare imagery is generated and whether it shares neural substrates with fear memory consolidation. The findings suggest that recurrent nightmare content draws on the same associative networks as fear memory: the amygdala, the insula, and portions of the medial prefrontal cortex, and that the vividness of nightmare imagery correlates with the emotional intensity of the underlying fear. This means nightmares are not random noise. They are, in some sense, the brain's attempt to access and process the fear memory during REM. When this attempt fails, when emotional intensity overwhelms processing capacity, the dream awakes. Lucid dreaming, by introducing prefrontal awareness into the process, may help sustain the processing attempt long enough for extinction-relevant learning to occur, rather than allowing the system to abort. A significant challenge in lucid dreaming research is standardizing what counts as a successful lucid dream for therapeutic purposes. There is a spectrum of lucidity. At the low end, the dreamer has a vague sense that something is unusual. At the high end, full, clear awareness that they are asleep and dreaming and can act with deliberate intention. For fear processing, the evidence suggests that higher-level lucidity is more effective. A dreamer with only partial awareness may still experience the full emotional intensity of the feared stimulus without the stabilizing knowledge that they are safe within a dream. Training protocols therefore emphasize not just achieving lucidity, but achieving and maintaining its quality, ensuring the dreamer remains grounded in awareness throughout the exposure, not just at its beginning. The technique of dream spinning, spinning the body in the dream while focusing on the sensory experience, was developed by Stephen LeBerg as a stabilization tool when lucidity begins to fade. The physical engagement of the proprioceptive sense appears to reinforce the dreamer's connection to the dream body and, counterintuitively, to stabilize the dream state rather than waking from it. Related techniques include touching surfaces in the dream, running the hands along a wall or the ground, and vocalizing to increase vividness. These stabilization methods are practical prerequisites for therapeutic use. In clinical protocols for nightmare treatment, patients are trained in these techniques specifically so they can maintain lucidity long enough to engage with feared content, rather than waking before the encounter can be completed. there is evidence that lucid dreaming frequency is partly heritable. Twin studies have found greater concordance in lucid dreaming frequency among identical twins compared to fraternal twins, suggesting a genetic contribution to the trait. Neurological correlates have also been identified. People who report frequent lucid dreaming show greater gray matter volume in the frontopolar cortex, a region associated with self-referential thought and metacognition, the ability to think about one's own thinking. This was documented in research from University College London and the Max Planck Institute. High metacognitive ability in waking life correlates with higher lucid dreaming frequency. The same cognitive capacity that allows a person to be reflective and self-aware during the day contributes to their ability to become aware within a dream. The role of the default mode network in lucid dreaming is an active area of research. The default mode network, including the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and angular gyrus, is active during mind-wandering, self-referential thought, and autobiographical memory retrieval. During ordinary dreaming, it operates without frontal oversight. During lucid dreaming, the network appears to engage differently. More self-referential processing occurs. More autobiographical awareness is present, and the dreamer can access a sense of personal identity that ordinary dreams suppress. This activation may be part of why lucid dreamers can recognize the dream as a dream. The sense of self is present enough to register the discontinuity between the dream world and remembered waking reality. Exposure therapy for social anxiety follows a specific protocol that has been particularly well studied. Patients are gradually exposed to social situations in a hierarchy from least to most anxiety-provoking, with the therapist coaching them to remain in the situation until anxiety naturally reduces. This process must be done without safety behaviors. The small compensatory actions people use to manage anxiety, such as rehearsing scripts, avoiding eye contact, or leaving early, because safety behaviors prevent extinction learning from occurring. Lucid dreaming offers an alternative space for social exposure. The dreamer can construct or encounter social scenarios within the dream and practice remaining present without safety behaviors, knowing that the dream cannot produce real social consequence. The field of virtual reality exposure therapy has produced substantial evidence over 2 decades that simulated feared environments can produce genuine extinction learning. Patients with height phobia, flying phobia, PTSD, and arachnophobia have all shown significant improvement following VR-based exposure, with effects comparable to in-person exposure in several randomized trials. The mechanism parallels real-world exposure. The brain processes the simulated threat as sufficiently real to activate fear, and repeated exposure without harm teaches the amygdala that the stimulus is safe. Lucid dreaming shares structural similarities with virtual reality therapy, but differs in one dimension. The imagery is entirely internally generated. The dreamer's own mind provides the feared content, making the exposure more personally calibrated than any externally constructed simulation could be. There is a phenomenon reported by many people who have used lucid dreaming for nightmare treatment that researchers have termed the transformation effect, a change in the character or quality of feared dream content following successful lucid engagement. Dreamers report that a figure appearing menacing for years becomes ordinary or even benign after being directly approached in a lucid dream. environments that were terrifying. Dark corridors, deep water, high edges, lose their threatening quality after being entered deliberately rather than encountered passively. Researchers note this transformation is consistent with what extinction learning predicts. The feared stimulus, encountered without harm in sufficient repetitions, loses its capacity to trigger the alarm response. The transformation is the perceptual signature of the extinction process occurring from the inside. The use of intention setting before sleep as a method for influencing dream content has scientific support. Research has shown that subjects who reviewed emotionally charged material before sleep were more likely to dream about it than control subjects who did not. More relevantly, studies on nightmare treatment have shown that deliberately rehearsing an alternative dream narrative during waking, as in imagery rehearsal therapy, can influence the spontaneous content of subsequent dreams. The brain's consolidation processes during sleep preferentially process material that was emotionally or cognitively active just before sleep onset. Setting a specific intention for how to behave during a feared dream scenario, reviewed carefully in the last hour before sleep, appears to increase the likelihood that the intention will be accessible within the dream itself. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences conducted experiments using real-time brain activity feedback during lucid dreaming, in which dreaming subjects could receive information to deepen or stabilize the lucid state. The experiment demonstrated that communication between the waking world and the dreaming mind during lucid REM sleep is bidirectional. Information can be sent in, and responses can be observed coming out. This bidirectionality has implications for therapeutic applications. With sufficient methodological development, it may eventually be possible for a therapist to provide real-time guidance during a patient's lucid nightmare, coaching from outside the dream, while the patient processes from within. That possibility remains exploratory, but the foundational work is in place. Chronic nightmares impose measurable daytime costs beyond disrupted sleep. Studies tracking patients with nightmare disorder show increased rates of anxiety disorders, depression, and related distress compared to matched control groups without nightmares. Daytime functioning is impaired. Concentration, emotional regulation, and social engagement are all affected. The anticipatory anxiety that develops around sleep itself, dread of the nightmare returning, creates a secondary problem that can outlast the original trauma. Patients begin to restrict sleep, to avoid going to bed, to fight alertness in the evening. This sleep avoidance produces cumulative sleep deprivation, which paradoxically increases nightmare frequency by increasing REM pressure. The nightmare and the avoidance feed each other. Any intervention that can interrupt this cycle carries significance beyond the nightmare hours themselves. Among the populations where lucid dreaming therapy has been most carefully studied is military veterans with combat-related PTSD. This population experiences high rates of trauma, nightmares, and generally lower response rates to standard pharmacological treatments for nightmares, including prazosin and certain antidepressants. Pilot studies have trained combat veterans in lucid dreaming induction and nightmare modification over several weeks. The majority of participants reported decreased nightmare frequency, and several reported direct confrontation with feared dream content that produced lasting changes in their waking relationship to the trauma. The sample sizes remain small and replication is needed, but the direction of findings has sustained researcher interest in this population specifically. You've been listening for a while now, thoughts still circling the edge of something old and frightening, like a figure at the end of a long corridor. Just notice. Don't judge. We're inside consciousness itself right now, exploring the very fear that does the watching. Strange, quiet, and something else beginning to happen. Let's drift onward together. Sleep architecture, the organization of sleep stages across the night, plays a direct role in the brain's capacity for fear regulation. Slow wave sleep, which predominates in the first third of the night, is associated with synaptic downscaling. The brain trims and consolidates synaptic connections formed during the day, removing noise and strengthening signal. REM, sleep, predominating in the final third, is associated with emotional memory processing and the integration of new emotional experiences into the broader autobiographical network. People deprived of REM sleep specifically show worsened emotional memory consolidation, impaired fear, extinction retention, and heightened amygdala reactivity the following day. Protecting sleep architecture is, in this sense, a clinical act. The night's organization is the treatment. The connection between lucid dreaming and meditation practice has been noted by both contemplative traditions and modern researchers. Studies examining long-term meditators consistently show higher rates of spontaneous lucid dreaming compared to non-meditating control groups. One proposed mechanism is that meditation strengthens the metacognitive awareness systems, particularly the frontoparietal network, responsible for self-monitoring during waking life, and that these systems carry forward into sleep. A second mechanism involves the de-automatization of attentional processing. Meditation trains the mind to notice its own processes rather than simply run them. And this habit of noticing can persist into the dream state as the awareness that detects the discontinuity between dream and waking reality. The border between mindfulness practice and lucid dreaming training may be thinner than either field traditionally acknowledges. Fear generalization is a process by which a fear learned in one context spreads to stimuli that are merely similar to the original threat. Someone bitten by a dog may develop not only a fear of that specific dog, but of all dogs, then of animals with similar movement patterns, then of any sudden movement in peripheral vision. This spreading is adaptive when the threat category is genuinely broad, but maladaptive when it extends beyond its useful range. Exposure therapy for phobias works in part by re-narrowing the threat category, teaching the brain that the specific stimulus is the threat, not the entire class. Lucid dreaming may offer a way to work with generalized fear by encountering specific feared stimuli and allowing the brain to redifferentiate them. The insula, a fold of cortex buried deep within the lateral sulcus, plays a pivotal role in translating emotional experience into physical sensation. When the amygdala generates a fear response, the insula receives and processes the interoceptive signals, the rapid heart rate, the tightening chest, the shallow breathing, and contributes them to the full experience of being afraid. People with damaged insulas often report that their fear responses feel incomplete or detached, as if the cognitive recognition of threat is present but the visceral quality is absent. This insular contribution helps explain why fear is not merely a mental event, but a whole-body experience. It also explains why the physical sensations of fear can become triggers, even in the absence of any external threatening stimulus. Directed attention in a lucid dream can alter physiological arousal in ways measured outside the sleeping body. Research by LaBerge and colleagues showed that when lucid dreamers performed tasks of varying emotional intensity within the dream, galvanic skin response, measuring skin conductance as a proxy for sympathetic nervous system activation, showed corresponding changes. High-intensity dream tasks produced higher skin conductance than low-intensity tasks. This means managing arousal within a lucid dream, orienting attention toward calming imagery, slowing the dream narrative, engaging with feared content at a reduced pace, may have direct effects on autonomic activation. The dreamer's attentional choices in the dream are not merely subjective experiences. They are physiological events. The question of whether animals experience fear in dreams has been addressed through animal research with implications for human nightmare therapy. Studies in rodents, particularly work by Matthew Wilson and Kenway Louie, showed that rats replay the day's experiences in hippocampal firing patterns during sleep, and that emotionally salient experiences, particularly those involving fear, are replayed more frequently and with greater intensity. Parallel observations have documented what appear to be distress states in mice during REM periods, without any external stimulus. These are animal studies, and direct parallels to human experience require caution. But if fear replay during sleep is a feature of mammalian neurology more broadly, the human nightmare may reflect a universal processing system running without adequate containment. Neurofeedback, a technology allowing individuals to observe and modify their own brain activity in real time, has been combined with lucid dreaming induction in exploratory research. In one protocol, developed at the University of Osnabrück, electroencephalographic feedback was provided to sleeping subjects in the form of acoustic cues timed to periods of theta-gamma coupling, the neural signature most associated with lucid dreaming. Subjects who received this feedback showed significantly higher rates of verified lucid dreaming compared to subjects who received random or no feedback. This technology is not yet widely available, but it points toward a future in which lucid dreaming can be reliably induced for therapeutic purposes without requiring months of behavioral training, making it potentially accessible to patients who lack the time to develop the skill independently. Fear of death is among the most widely reported themes in recurrent nightmares across cultures. Psychologists studying universal dream themes have found that scenarios involving the dreamer's own death, the death of loved ones, or situations of extreme mortal danger appear with cross-cultural consistency. What varies across cultures is the interpretation given to these dreams and the emotional response they provoke, not the basic content. Death-themed nightmares are particularly common in populations with high levels of health anxiety, trauma history, and existential uncertainty. Lucid dreaming has been reported anecdotally as transformative, specifically in relation to death-themed dreams, with the experience of dying within a lucid dream, followed by the recognition that one continues to exist, described by many practitioners as profoundly reassuring. The relationship between waking fear and dream fear is bidirectional. It is not only that waking fears produce nightmares, There is also evidence that nightmare distress contributes to waking anxiety. Longitudinal studies tracking anxiety and nightmare frequency over time show that each predicts the other in subsequent time periods, suggesting a mutually reinforcing cycle. People with high waking anxiety have more nightmares, and people with frequent nightmares show increasing anxiety during waking hours over time. This bidirectionality means that treating the nightmare can reduce waking anxiety, not merely improve sleep quality. Studies of nightmare treatment consistently show improvements in daytime emotional functioning, not only in nighttime sleep metrics. The night and the day are not separate systems. They are one continuous regulatory cycle. 50 facts into this journey. The picture has grown more intricate than it first appeared. We came asking whether it is possible to face your greatest fear in a dream. What the evidence now shows is something more precise. The dream is not a metaphor for facing fear. It is, neurologically, a genuine instance of it. Real amygdala activation, real prefrontal regulation, real physiological arousal, processed in a state where physical harm cannot compound the emotional one. The boundary between the dream's fear and the waking world's fear is far more porous than intuition suggests. What changes in the dream can change what wakes with the dreamer. The second half of tonight follows what happens when that resolution has time to become something lasting. What just opened? The question of what happens when the body's fear system is given a container safe enough to process without escape is not only a neuroscience question. You may be carrying something that has returned enough times that part of you has stopped expecting it to resolve. The second half of tonight follows the possibility that the dark, entered with awareness, is safer than it has seemed. Notice your breath. Notice that it has been here the whole time. Now we continue. The body keeps its own record of fear. Bessel van der Kolk's research on trauma and somatic memory documents how traumatic fear is encoded not only in declarative memory, but in the body's muscular, postural, and autonomic patterns. Survivors of trauma frequently report bodily sensations that precede and outlast conscious memory of the traumatic event. A tightening in the chest, a protective posture, a vigilance held in the shoulders. These somatic patterns can be triggered by cues that bypass conscious recognition entirely, producing fear responses the person cannot explain. REM sleep is one of the few states in which the body's autonomic regulation is significantly altered, and some researchers have proposed that this creates a window for somatic fear patterns to shift. Not through insight, but through the body's own deepening stillness. The anterior cingulate cortex sits at a crossroads between cognitive and emotional processing. It monitors conflict, discrepancies between what is expected and what is occurring, and is consistently activated in situations that require the suppression of a prepotent response in favor of a more considered one. In fear contexts, the anterior cingulate helps regulate the speed and strength of the amygdala's response by signaling the prefrontal cortex when an alarm has been triggered. People with PTSD show altered anterior cingulate function, and its activation is one of the biomarkers of successful fear extinction. During lucid dreaming, when the dreamer holds two contradictory frames, this is real, and this is a dream, the anterior cingulate is likely engaged as a monitor of that contradiction. contributing to the stabilization of lucid awareness in the presence of feared content. The sleep architecture of people with anxiety disorders differs measurably from that of non-anxious controls. People with generalized anxiety disorder show shorter sleep duration, longer sleep onset latency, more frequent awakenings, reduced slow-wave sleep, and increased REM density, more frequent eye movements within REM periods, associated with higher emotional processing load. People with PTSD additionally show alterations in the timing of REM onset and in the distribution of REM across the night. These changes are not merely symptoms of anxiety. They also perpetuate it by disrupting the emotional regulatory functions of sleep. Correcting sleep architecture through behavioral sleep medicine, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or targeted pharmacotherapy can itself reduce anxiety symptom severity over time. An area of active research concerns whether lucid dreaming frequency can predict the effectiveness of trauma-focused therapy. Preliminary work has examined whether trait lucid dreaming frequency, how often a person naturally becomes lucid in dreams, correlates with outcomes in trauma therapies, including EMDR. Early findings have suggested that higher baseline lucid dreaming frequency may be associated with faster and more complete symptom remission. The proposed mechanism is that people who are naturally more metacognitively active during sleep may be better equipped to engage with the reprocessing demands of trauma therapy during waking hours as well. If confirmed in larger samples, this would suggest that assessing and potentially training lucid dreaming ability before beginning trauma therapy could be a useful clinical preparation. The concept of safe place imagery, a technique in trauma therapy where the patient establishes a detailed mental image of a safe, calming environment that can be accessed during distressing moments, has a natural extension in lucid dreaming. Some clinicians have begun training patients not only to become lucid in nightmares, but to first establish a stable lucid dream environment from which they can approach feared content. The dreamer learns, in early practice sessions, to enter a safe place in the lucid dream, a calm landscape, a familiar room, a quiet shore, before attempting to engage with frightening material. This anchoring technique follows the same logic as safe place imagery in somatic therapy, establishing a felt sense of safety before moving toward the fear. Fear of the dark, nyctophobia, is among the most common specific phobias, particularly in childhood, but persisting into adulthood for a significant minority of people. It differs from ordinary discomfort in dim environments in that it involves genuine cognitive distortions. The belief that unseen threats are present, that something will emerge from the darkness, that the absence of visual information signals danger. Several researchers have noted that nyctophobia and nightmare disorder often co-occur, and that both appear to involve the same underlying mechanism, an overactive threat detection system that flags the unknown as dangerous rather than merely unverified. The dark of the dream, the moments in a nightmare when feared content is approaching but not yet visible, may represent the same neural trigger as the dark of the bedroom. The neurochemistry of REM sleep includes not only low norepinephrine, but also elevated acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter most associated with attention, learning, and the formation of new memories. Acetylcholine drives hippocampal activity that underlies memory consolidation during REM, and it sustains the vivid, internally generated imagery of the dream state. From a pharmacological perspective, drugs that increase cholinergic activity, including galantamine, a medication originally developed for Alzheimer's disease, have been shown to increase lucid dreaming frequency when taken during the wake back to bed protocol. The relationship between memory-forming chemistry and dream awareness suggests that the same system that builds memories may, under the right conditions, build awareness of the dream itself. The phenomenon of sleep paralysis, the temporary inability to move that occurs when REM atonia persists briefly after waking, is experienced by approximately 8% of the general population at least once in their lives, with higher rates among people with narcolepsy, anxiety disorders, and irregular sleep schedules. For many people, sleep paralysis is accompanied by vivid, often frightening sensory experiences, including the sensation of a presence in the room, pressure on the chest, or visual figures approaching. Across cultures, sleep paralysis has been interpreted as supernatural visitation. The old hag in Newfoundland, the kanashibari in Japan, the cauchemar in France. What neuroscience now understands is that the brain's threat detection system is generating imagery in a state where the body cannot respond to it. For some individuals, sleep paralysis can be deliberately entered and used as a gateway to lucid dreaming through a technique called wake-initiated lucid dreaming. In this approach, the practitioner maintains conscious awareness through the transition from waking to sleep, experiencing the hypnagogic imagery that emerges as consciousness loosens, and entering the dream while retaining lucidity. This approach is challenging because it requires remaining calm during the disorienting hypnagogic period, which can include fear-inducing imagery, sounds, and physical sensations. For this reason, it has been specifically studied in the context of sleep paralysis. People who experience spontaneous sleep paralysis can learn to recognize the state as a transition opportunity rather than a threat, reframing what was previously terrifying as the entry point to heightened awareness. The relationship between creativity and lucid dreaming has been explored in several studies, with consistent findings of higher creative thinking scores among frequent lucid dreamers compared to non-lucid dreamers, even after controlling for general intelligence. The proposed mechanism involves the same metacognitive flexibility that enables lucidity: the capacity to observe thought processes, recognize patterns, and generate novel combinations, which also underlies divergent thinking and creative problem-solving. Thomas Edison reportedly used a technique involving holding metal balls while dozing, so that they would fall and wake him at the moment of sleep onset, allowing him to capture hypnagogic imagery for creative use. Salvador Dali described similar practices. The edge of sleep may be not only a place of fear, but one of the mind's most generative states. Research has examined the experiences of people who reported using lucid dreaming to rehearse feared real-world scenarios, job interviews, social confrontations, performances, and whether this rehearsal influenced their waking performance. Participants reported subjectively that lucid dream rehearsal reduced anticipatory anxiety and increased their felt sense of preparedness. Behavioral performance measures showed modest but consistent improvement in tasks rehearsed in lucid dreams compared to tasks that had not been rehearsed. the researchers cautioned against overstating the findings, given the role of expectation and self-selection. But the results suggest that the brain treats practiced behavior within a lucid dream as at least partially equivalent to practiced behavior in waking life. The distinction between real experience and vividly imagined experience may be less categorical than it appears. In trauma treatment, the window of tolerance describes the zone of autonomic arousal within which processing is possible. Not too calm to engage with difficult material, not too activated to maintain cognitive coherence. When a patient is below the window, they are dissociated and disconnected from the emotional content. When they are above it, they are in survival mode and cannot integrate new information. Effective trauma therapy keeps the patient within this window. Lucid dreaming offers an analogous structure. The dreamer must be sufficiently emotionally engaged to work with the feared content, but must maintain enough metacognitive clarity to remain aware that they are dreaming. The stabilization techniques of lucid dreaming, grounding, spinning, touching surfaces, can be understood as methods for staying within the window of tolerance inside the dream. The brainstem plays a specific role in nightmare generation. The pons, a region involved in REM sleep generation, sends activation signals upward through the brain that trigger the vivid visual imagery of dreams. In Hobson and McCarley's activation synthesis model of dreaming, the brain responds to these brainstem activations by constructing narrative content from available memories and emotional associations. In people with PTSD, these activations appear to preferentially engage fear-related networks in the amygdala and insula, producing dreams that are emotionally loaded and threatening. This is not a conscious process. It is a bottom-up initiation of fear content before the cortex has any opportunity to organize the experience. Understanding this clarifies why simply thinking calming thoughts before bed is insufficient. The nightmare is generated below the level where deliberate thought operates. A consistent finding in the lucid dream therapy literature is that the attitude adopted toward feared dream content matters at least as much as the approach taken. Dreamers who report the most lasting reduction in nightmare severity are not those who defeated the feared figure through aggression or who fled successfully. They are those who engaged with curiosity, compassion, or acceptance. This resonates with acceptance-based approaches in waking therapy, such as acceptance and commitment therapy, which emphasizes changing the relationship the person has with feared emotional content rather than eliminating it. In the lucid dream, this translates to approaching the threatening figure and asking what it wants, or standing still in the frightening landscape and simply looking at it. The fear, engaged honestly, tends to diminish. After 64 facts, something clearer has emerged. The fear does not live only in the nightmare. It lives in the circuit. The amygdala's encoding, the prefrontal cortex's reach, the hippocampus's context, the insula's translation into body. The dream is not where fear was born. The dream is where the brain goes to process it at night. And what lucid dreaming offers is the capacity to be present for that processing rather than absent from it. The sleeper who wakes in terror has been present for the alarm but not for the working through. The lucid dreamer stays for both. That staying, that willingness to be inside the fear without being swept away, is not a talent. It is a practice. and practices can be learned. The social dimension of nightmare disorder is rarely discussed but clinically significant. People with severe nightmares often become reluctant to sleep in the presence of others, isolating themselves from partners and family out of embarrassment at their own distress behaviors. Crying out, thrashing, waking suddenly. This isolation compounds the distress of the disorder itself, removing a source of social support that might otherwise buffer the anxiety. Partners of people with nightmare disorder also experience disrupted sleep and elevated stress levels. Treating the nightmare can therefore have relational consequences that extend beyond the individual. Restoring shared sleep, reducing the secondary burden on caregivers, and allowing the social fabric around the person's fear to relax, along with the fear itself. Cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, follows a circadian rhythm with its lowest levels occurring in the early to middle sleep period and its highest levels in the early morning hours just before natural waking. This cortisol awakening response is thought to prepare the body for the demands of the day. In people with PTSD and nightmare disorder, the cortisol rhythm is frequently dysregulated, with higher overnight cortisol levels and a blunted or exaggerated awakening response. This dysregulation contributes to the hypervigilance and exaggerated startle response that characterizes these conditions during waking hours. Normalizing sleep patterns through effective intervention, including nightmare treatment, has been shown to gradually restore more typical cortisol rhythms, suggesting that the sleep and stress hormone systems are in close communication. Ketamine-assisted therapy has recently shown promise in treating treatment-resistant PTSD, with rapid reductions in nightmares and intrusive symptoms reported in several clinical trials. The mechanism appears to involve ketamine's action on the glutamate system, specifically its blockade of NMDA receptors, which play a central role in both synaptic plasticity and reconsolidation. By disrupting NMDA receptor activation during or shortly after fear memory retrieval, ketamine appears to interfere with reconsolidation of fear memories, producing lasting reductions in their emotional intensity. This glutamatergic mechanism overlaps with what researchers believe is occurring during successful exposure therapy and during lucid dreaming that results in fear extinction. Multiple pathways arrive at the same neural destination: the weakening of the fear memory's grip on the amygdala and the consolidation of something safer in its place. There is a particular kind of fear that appears almost universally in recurrent nightmares: the fear of being unable to escape. Being chased is the most widely reported nightmare theme across virtually every study of dream content ever conducted. The dreamer runs but cannot run fast enough, tries to call for help but cannot make sound, reaches for a door that will not open. Researchers have interpreted this universal theme through several frameworks: evolutionary threat simulation, anxiety processing, learned helplessness, rehearsal. But one finding appears consistent: becoming lucid during a chase nightmare, stopping and turning to face the pursuer consistently transforms the feared figure, often ending the chase entirely. The fear of being unable to escape becomes, in the lucid state, a choice to stop fleeing. The therapeutic potential of lucid dreaming for children with recurrent nightmares has been studied in several small trials. Children are naturally prone to nightmares. nightmare frequency peaks between ages 5 and 10, and are also notably good candidates for lucid dreaming training, given their high neuroplasticity and greater baseline dream frequency compared to adults. Protocols using simplified versions of reality testing and the MILD technique, adapted for children as young as 7 and combined with parent-guided pre-sleep narrative rehearsal, have shown significant reductions in nightmare frequency and severity compared to children on waitlists. Parents reported decreased bedtime resistance and reduced family disruption, suggesting that benefits extended beyond the child's individual sleep experience. Certain individuals who practice lucid dreaming regularly describe a phenomenon they call dream incubation, deliberately structuring the content of a dream before sleep. Similar to the ancient Greek practice described earlier in this hour, Steve. Modern practitioners combine this with lucid dreaming training, setting intentions not just to become lucid, but to encounter a specific scenario once lucid. For therapeutic purposes, the scenario might involve a feared object encountered in a safe context, a difficult conversation resolved, or a trauma memory encountered with support rather than alone. The evidence that intention setting before sleep influences dream content provides a mechanism through which this could work. The dreamer is not only reactive to what the dream produces, they can, with practice, become a participant in the dream's generation. The relationship between humor and fear in lucid dreams is noted in multiple first-person accounts and clinical case reports. When lucid dreamers encounter frightening content and respond not with fear or aggression but with humor, laughing at a terrifying figure, making it absurd, transforming it into something ridiculous, the emotional intensity of the dream reliably decreases. This is consistent with what cognitive behavioral therapists call cognitive diffusion, creating distance from a feared thought or image by treating it as less literally threatening. Within a lucid dream, diffusion can be enacted physically. The feared figure can be made smaller, given a funny hat, or spoken to with warm irreverence. The brain's threat detection system, it turns out, responds to the frame in which the threat is held, not only to its presence. Physical exercise and its relationship to nightmare frequency has been studied with consistent results. Regular aerobic exercise is associated with reduced nightmare frequency, improved sleep architecture, and lower overall anxiety levels. The proposed mechanisms include reduced cortisol dysregulation, increased slow-wave sleep depth, and improved autonomic nervous system flexibility, all of which contribute to better emotional regulatory capacity both during sleep and during waking hours. For people using lucid dreaming as a therapeutic tool, maintaining a regular exercise practice may improve the quality of the REM sleep in which lucid dreaming and nightmare processing occur, as well as reducing the overall anxiety load that generates nightmare content in the first place. A combination of behavioral sleep work, exercise, and lucid dreaming training may produce more complete outcomes. The most recent clinical consensus on nightmare disorder, articulated in guidelines from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, lists imagery rehearsal therapy as the only treatment with a strong recommendation for chronic nightmares. Exposure, relaxation, and rescripting therapy and certain medications carry lower-grade recommendations. Lucid dreaming therapy is listed as an emerging approach with preliminary evidence. The clinical establishment is appropriately cautious, because the evidence base is smaller and the methodological challenges remain significant. Defining successful lucidity. Standardizing protocols. Addressing the large proportion of patients who cannot achieve reliable lucidity. But the trajectory of the research is consistent. Each new study adds to the picture. Each documented case of a person entering a nightmare with awareness and leaving with less fear makes the framework more coherent. Here is what the evidence points toward, held carefully so as not to claim more than it demonstrates. The dream does not merely replay fear. It is a processing environment for fear, one with its own neurochemical conditions, its own regulatory windows, its own architecture of safety and exposure. And the lucid dreamer, moving through that environment with awareness, is doing something that resembles therapeutic work at a neural level. Not because of any mystical property of dreaming, but because the same mechanisms that produce fear extinction in a therapist's office are present in the sleeping brain, waiting to be engaged. The remaining facts carry a different quality. They move closer to something that does not need to be argued. It simply needs to be felt. You might be feeling tired now. That is perfectly fine. Breathe slowly. Feel how the breath has been changing across this hour, arriving fast and alert at the beginning, and now moving towards something quieter, without any instruction from you. You have been inside the fear system for the last 75 facts, watching it from just close enough to understand it, like a figure that turned to face its pursuer and found nothing there. Just the quiet room. Just the stillness that was always underneath the dream. We're almost there now. The brain that feared has always known how to rest. Every night it descends, through the lightest layers of awareness, past the hypnagogic edge, into the slow darkness of deep sleep. And it does this without being asked. The fear rides down with it, sometimes loudly, but the descent happens regardless. Sleep does not wait for the fear to be resolved before it comes. It comes anyway, and while it comes, quietly, the repair begins. Fear is not the opposite of safety. It is the signal that the body is working, scanning, protecting, trying to keep the self intact across time. The opposite of fear is not the absence of threat. It is the deep knowledge that the threat has passed. The brain can be taught that knowledge. That teaching is slow, and it is gentle, and it happens most completely in the dark. REM sleep is the most social stage of sleep. Brain regions involved in reading other people's emotions, recognizing facial expressions, vocal tones, and subtle cues of threat or welcome are among the most consistently active during REM dreaming. The night is not empty of other people. It is full of them. The faces that appear in the dream are made from the same neural circuits that recognize every face you have ever trusted. The practice of becoming lucid in a dream does not require the dream to go well. The dreamer can enter fear, lose the lucid thread, be swept back into the nightmare, and wake. And the practice is still occurring. Each time the dreamer returns to the intention, something in the brain is rehearsed. The recognition comes a little faster. The stability holds a little longer. Progress in this work is measured over nights, not within a single one. Norepinephrine is at its lowest point of the 24-hour cycle during REM sleep. This is the chemical most associated with the alarm response, the sharp edge of threat, the freeze before flight, the sense that something terrible is about to happen. Its nadir in REM means that the fear being processed in the dream is being processed without its most activating fuel. The dream rehearses facing the fear. The chemistry quietly removes the sharpest edge while the rehearsal happens. Healing from fear is not the erasure of the fear memory. It is the addition of something stronger alongside it. The original encoding remains, written in the body during a moment of real alarm, and that writing does not simply disappear. What changes is the competition. The new memory of safety, accumulated through repetition, begins to win the contest for the brain's attention when the trigger arrives. The fear still fires, but it fires shorter, quieter, and with less certainty that it is right. Some researchers describe lucid dreaming as a form of controlled surrender. The paradox of it is not resolvable through ordinary categories. To remain aware while asleep, to be inside an experience while observing it, to feel fear and simultaneously know it as a construction. It is a both-and state in a mind that usually insists on either-or. That both-and quality is precisely what makes it useful. The feared thing can be present, and the dreamer can also be present. And the co-presence is the healing. The fear that remains after long work is smaller than the original. Not because the original danger was trivial. It was not. But because fear, like all biological signals, is calibrated to the environment it inhabits. And the environment has changed. The person sitting with it now is not the person who first learned it. The body carries the memory of being small and unprotected in a world that moved too fast. That body has grown. It carries more now than it knows. The lucid dream practice that has produced the most consistently reported positive outcomes is the simplest. Seeing the feared figure and not running, not attacking it, not trying to change it, simply standing in its presence, aware that you are dreaming, and letting it be there. The fear registers. The heart rate rises inside the dream. And then, slowly, incrementally, over repetitions, the feared figure diminishes. Not because it was defeated, because it was finally, completely, seen. Memory consolidation during sleep is not a passive recording process. It is an active editorial one. The sleeping brain selects which experiences to strengthen, which to weaken, which to connect to existing knowledge, and which to isolate. Emotional salience is one of the primary filters. Fear has high salience, but so does safety. When safety is experienced with sufficient intensity and repetition, the dream that ends in stillness is being filed alongside the one that ended in alarm. Over time, the collection changes. The body's response to a resolved fear is distinct from its response to an unresolved one. When fear resolves, when the threat passes or is processed, the parasympathetic nervous system gradually restores equilibrium. Heart rate slows, muscles release, breath deepens. This restoration is not the absence of fear. It is a positive state, with its own physiology, sometimes called the relaxation response. The lucid dreamer who stays in the feared scenario long enough for the fear to naturally diminish may be producing this response inside the dream. The body releasing during sleep what it could not release during the day. There is a quality to night that waking has no equivalent for. The stillness, the darkness, the suspension of the body's weight, the withdrawal of the world's claims. All of it creates a condition in which the mind's deepest processes can operate without interference. Fear, which in waking life must compete with the demands of the day, has the night to itself. In the night, it does its work. It's ancient, involuntary, surprisingly patient work of sorting through what has not yet been made safe. The dream does not require the dreamer to do anything. It runs on its own. The images arrive unbidden. The narrative unfolds without instruction. The feared content appears without conscious invitation. What the lucid dreamer adds to this is simply awareness. The recognition that the dream is a dream. That addition, which changes nothing in the external structure of the dream and everything in the dreamer's relationship to it, is enough to shift the entire quality of the experience. The capacity for awareness was always there. It needed only to be brought inside. Night terrors, distinct from nightmares, in that they occur during slow-wave sleep rather than REM, without narrative content or dream imagery, involve extreme physiological arousal, often including screaming, thrashing, and eyes open without consciousness. The person having a night terror is not dreaming. They are in a state of intense alarm without a source. Night terrors are more common in children and typically resolve by adulthood. They are not responsive to the same interventions as nightmare disorder and do not involve the dreaming mind in any way that lucid dreaming could address. An important clinical distinction. There is growing interest in what happens not just during the lucid encounter with feared content, but in the hours and days that follow. Several case reports and small-scale studies document what might be called a post-lucid window, a period of heightened emotional processing in the days following a significant lucid dreaming experience. Dreamers describe increased clarity about the source of the fear, spontaneous memories related to the feared content, and a general sense of internal movement. The night's work does not end at waking. What began in the dream continues in the days that follow it. The language used to describe fear shapes the fear's neurological organization. Naming an emotion, a process called affect labeling, reduces amygdala activation in neuroimaging studies. When participants view threatening images and apply verbal labels to the emotions they produce, the prefrontal cortex activates and the amygdala's response diminishes. This is the neuroscience behind the therapeutic value of talking about fear. Lucid dreamers who speak within the dream, who say aloud to a frightening figure, "I see you," or simply, "I know I am dreaming," appear to produce a version of this same regulatory process inside the sleeping brain. Words, even in a dream, carry regulatory weight. The question asked at the beginning of this night, "Can you face your greatest fear in a dream?" has a more nuanced answer than a simple yes or no. You can face it. Whether you do depends on practice, on the quality of your lucidity, on the intentions you carry to the threshold of sleep. The brain that learned the fear and the brain that generates the dream are the same brain. The architecture that built the alarm also built the pathway through it. The dream is not an obstacle to healing. Under the right conditions, it is the environment in which healing proceeds most directly. The practice of dying in a lucid dream, deliberately entering a scenario of death or absolute threat and remaining present through it, has been described by advanced lucid dreamers and contemplative practitioners as among the most profound experiences available within the dream state. The body responds as if the threat is real. The heart rate rises. The breath catches. And then the dreamer does not die. Waking occurs, or the dream continues, and the dreamer remains. This not dying, experienced in a state neurologically indistinguishable from real fear, appears to recalibrate the amygdala's assessment of ultimate threat. Fear has a frequency. It comes in waves, building, cresting, and, if it is not reinforced, subsiding. The clinical term for this natural subsidence is habituation. Sustained exposure to a feared stimulus, without harm or escape, results in a gradual decrease in fear intensity. The wave crests and then comes down. The person who endures the wave, rather than escaping it, learns something the escape prevents: that the wave ends. Lucid dreaming provides a container for the wave. The dreamer can stay in the feared scenario long enough for habituation to begin, and wake knowing the wave came down. The last facts move through quieter water. The science has given what it can give. The neurotransmitters, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, the reconsolidation window, the gamma waves, the extinction learning, all pointing in the same direction, toward the possibility that the thing most feared entered with awareness rather than fled, does not hold the power it appeared to hold. The dream, in this reading, is not the darkness. The dream is the place where the darkness is finally, gently, examined. Your sleeping brain is not passive tonight. Right now, or as you approach sleep, the same systems that generate fear and generate dreams are active, processing the emotional content of the day, sorting what is safe from what is not, filing what needs filing, and releasing what can be released. You do not need to do anything for this to occur. The biology proceeds. You are a participant in your own healing simply by being here, breathing, and allowing. The amygdala that fires in a nightmare fires the same way it fires in the presence of genuine threat. The fear is real. And at the same time, within the safety of the sleeping body, within the contained world of the dream, the consequences of that fear are being held more carefully than they are in waking life. The body cannot be harmed. The past cannot return exactly as it was. Something in the system knows this, even when the dreamer does not. There is a moment in some lucid dreams when the dreamer, having recognized the dream, looks around at the constructed world and feels something unexpected. Not fear, but a quiet, sourceless ease. The dream continues to unfold. The imagery persists. The narrative moves forward. But the quality of the dreamer's presence within it has changed. The same scene that was terrifying a moment ago becomes simply a scene. The observer has arrived. That arrival is the whole practice, repeated until it is no longer surprising. The fear you have carried has kept you company for a long time. It has learned your rhythms, your triggers, your particular vulnerabilities, your specific hours of greatest weakness. It is not a stranger. It is an old, overworked system doing its best with incomplete information. It was built for a world that required faster, sharper alarms than the world most of us now inhabit. It has been loyal to a task it has outrun the need for. It deserves, finally, to rest. The answer is not that fear can be defeated in a dream. It is that fear, encountered in a state of awareness, begins to dissolve what it was made of. What looked like a permanent wall turns out to be a habit. What looked like an absolute truth turns out to be an encoding from a particular moment, in a particular body, under a particular kind of pressure. That moment has passed. The habit can change. And the dream, soft and safe and entirely your own, is a place where the change can begin. One quiet night at a time. The same amygdala that was firing at the beginning of this hour has been quieting through it. Not because the fear was removed, but because awareness was brought in alongside it, widening the space around it. We followed the pathway from the alarm response to the prefrontal cortex that regulates it. We entered the REM chemistry, where norepinephrine falls and the dream becomes a place of lower consequence. Fear without its sharpest fuel. The dream was always doing the work. It was waiting only for the dreamer to stay inside it. The Dream Science for Sleep playlist has been moving through this territory. The space where the sleeping mind does what the waking one cannot always manage. The next video traces it further, into the part of the map that tonight only pointed toward. That video is waiting whenever you are ready. The fear that was here at the beginning of this hour is still here, and quieter. Let your body give itself over to what the night already knows how to do. If sleep comes, let it carry you into the part of the work that needed you to stop first. Into the dark, where what frightened you loses the weight it carries in daylight. But if your eyes are closed, stay there. Rest well. Quiet one. The dream that contains the fear has always been safer than it looked. Gentle facts for restless minds. Sleep well. Good night.